Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the industry, and how you found your way to the USGA.
I played a lot of sports growing up. Soccer was my main sport, but golf was probably a close second. Played in high school, got close to my high school golf coach, and he always is kind of a mentor. He encouraged me to do something professionally around golf. Um, I had aspirations of playing college golf, but I went to University of Arizona, and they were way too good for me. So I knew I wasn't going to make money playing golf. But I thought, well, maybe there's another way I can, again, be around it professionally. And my first thought was golf course architecture. So I actually started in architecture at University of Arizona, and and then I migrated over to landscape architecture and thought about golf course architecture. But that program was dwindling when I was an undergraduate there. But through that program, I had to take some plant science classes, had to take some soil science classes, and I just through that I got exposed to the world of agronomy and golf course maintenance. I really liked the soils classes for whatever reason. Had a great soils professor, Dr. Don Post. He encouraged me to get a job at a local golf course. So I did. I started working at Star Pass, which is used to be TPC Star Pass in Tucson, and worked for Joe Trafficano and had a good relationship there, and was wrapping up my undergrad, and I had and again, Dr. Post introduced me to another professor who was getting some funding by the Arizona Department of Water Resources to do some graduate work, and that interested me, and so I continued to grad school and did some work on the weighing lysimeters there at the Carson Turfgrass facility. Basically looked at the Arizona Department of Water Resources had a water allotment, a water duty, and I looked at the influence of that on drought and whether we'd have increased salinity in the root zone with this allotment that was basically put turf under a deficit irrigation regime. And it's interesting. I still actually talk about that to this day because that research ultimately led to recommendations from the industry to the Department of Water Resources to set the allocation for what golf courses are allotted today. And we don't go into the details of that, but so that was a great experience. Took a bunch of soils classes, and once I wrapped up, that was in 1998. I worked for a soil testing lab in Phoenix and did a bunch of work for golf courses doing soil and water and plant tissue testing. And I kind of always had the USGA agronomist job in the back of my mind. Formed a relationship with Pat Gross, who was the director of the West region for many years. But they weren't hiring for a while, so I went to go work for Troon Golf, Troon Management for a while at Talking Stick, which was a good experience, and finally led me to the USGA finally started hiring, and Pat Rose called me, and that's been this is my 18th season now as an agronomist with USGA, and it was a daunting start to the USGA. I knew soils, I knew how to be a superintendent, but gosh, I was overwhelmed with the variety of topics that you're sort of expected to be an expert on, and so I had a lot to learn, and I hadn't been exposed to that much cool season grass maintenance and management. So, I live in Phoenix, but I traveled to Colorado and Salt Lake City and the mountains of New Mexico and the mountains in California. So now, after a bunch of years, it's kind of cool to be able to see both warm season and cool season grasses. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. So quite a variety of of courses that I get to visit every year and see some pretty amazing sites from Hawaii to New Mexico to California, Southern Nevada, and the deserts in California and Arizona. So that's kind of how I got exposed to the industry.
Yeah, home games are always nice. So you mentioned, when you first got started, just a little how it was a little overwhelming and you were kind of thrown into the fire on some things maybe you didn't understand. I think one of the unique things about the USGA in the green section is you do have a large number of agronomists spread out all over the country. So how much in those early days did you lean on some of those other agronomists to kind of help you get through some of those hurdles that maybe you weren't as familiar with, whether it was cool season grasses or just other types of things you're seeing on the course, that you had never encountered before?
Yeah, big time. Fortunately, I was encouraged by Pat Gross to go travel with other agronomists my first year, and at the time it was Jim Skorlowski up in Northeast. I spent a nice week with him, and we saw a bunch of courses that had endured winter damage. Actually came back later in the year and saw courses that were dealing with just a bunch of disease stress from hot and humid conditions. I think in all my travels up there, I didn't see one golf course that had USGA built greens. And in the West, most of the courses I see are USGA greens. So that was really eye-opening to see golf courses that were, 80, 90, 100 years old that were doing quite well, that didn't have gravel and sand and subsurface drainage. They had just, top dressed over 80 years and had modified root zones and were making it work just fine. So that was a great learning experience for me. And to this day, I when I have courses that I go visit that have had winter damage, I'll talk to guys like Darren Brevard and Elliot Dowling and Zach Nicoludis about what they're seeing in terms of permeable and impermeable covers and using straw and just the tactics that they're seeing that I don't see day in and day out. So the brotherhood of the green section agronomists, that network was crucial to my early days, and even now it's crucial to connect with those guys and stay in tune with what's going on.
So, Brian, dig into your article for us here, Getting Rid of Fairway Grain.
Yeah, so especially the better golfers, they they get a little steeper on the ball, and when they hit a golf shot, especially an iron, into grain, whether it's bent grass or Bermuda grass, it can tug on the club pretty good. And occasionally, I'll hear, because, during my visits, I always encourage courses to bring along some green committee members. And some of those green committee members are more, have a stronger voice than others. And from time to time, they'll complain about hitting into the grain, and especially on Bermuda grass, but also on bent grass. Depending on the mowing pattern, if you're burning in the lines, in other words, if you're mowing the same direction over and over to achieve an aesthetic that some would argue is pretty attractive, because you really see the contrast from the lighter cut, which is down grain, to the darker colored, which is into the grain. It may look attractive, but there's some impact on playability. And when you're hitting a 9-iron down grain on the lighter colored side, your club just kind of flows through the turf, whereas on the opposite side, perhaps just a few feet away, if you're mowing the sort of the tuxedo cut or black and white, there's a lot of different names for it, I guess. You kind of go up and back, and a very different experience for those, especially those low handicap golfers. So the article is really about how to try to mitigate that. And the obvious one is to avoid burning in the lines, as you change mower direction, every time you mow. But when you do that, some would argue it's not as attractive because you don't see the lines there. The lines aren't as distinct. But if you do continue to mow on those same patterns, especially with bent or Bermuda grass, you're more than likely going to develop some grain. It turns out it's pretty darn hard to get rid of that. You turn to, just conduct vertical mowing, put brushes on the mowers, or run a tow behind brush, which are great strategies. But if there's considerable grain that's, the turf has really been trained to lay over, those strategies, I've learned that they're not going to get rid of grain. It would take a couple of years, more than likely, to get rid of grain with those type of less aggressive strategies. So, a number of courses in California have been really aggressive, and in Arizona and even southern Nevada, courses have been aggressive. And what they take a different tactic rather than the sort of light and frequent, which I like for maintenance of grain. This article is more about, let's really dive into grain mitigation. So really get in and stand up that bent or Bermuda grass. And how to do that is a combination of tools with PTO-driven vertical mowers, whether it's Sysis or Wiedemann or the First Products VC60, Graydon. Those are all spectacular products. Run those in multiple directions. I really like the springtime rakes with really heavy tines outfitted on that rake. It's a fast machine. That's an 8-mile-an-hour machine. Doesn't break down. You can go against the grain. You can spin the fairways out and do circles. It's quite effective at standing up the Bermuda grass or bent grass. And then the kicker is you follow that with a really aggressive scalping. And if the fairways, let's say where the fairways are cut at 350 or 400ths of an inch, we're talking about scalping it 200 to 0.250 to a quarter of an inch. So it's an aggressive process. You're going to produce a lot of material that you're going to have to sweep up and haul away. So there's some expense involved with just the man hours to vacuum up, haul off that material off. And there will be some disruption to the playing surface. But in the summer on Bermuda grass, it's temporary. It's 2 weeks at the most, and you can still play golf on it. You're going to get better roll on your drives. But it really is a powerful strategy to mitigate that grain and encourage more upright turf. The Bermuda grass really likes to grow on top of itself. The stems, the stolons just create this nasty network, this little toupee, if you will, of stems and stolons. If you don't stand that up and cut it off, it just gets, for lack of a better term, it gets leggy. And not only does that impact playability, but it impacts the ability of water to just penetrate into the soil, and it just renders the Bermuda grass less healthy. So standing all that up, cutting it off, it improves the ability of water to get into the soil, and it improves the playing surface. And I can't, I didn't dream this up. I really give credit to the guys like Chris Wilson at LACC, Justin DePippo at Bel Air, and Shadow Creek in Las Vegas has done this for years. They've also done phrase mowing, which is even more intensive than this practice I just described. But not many courses have the ability to phrase mow year in and year out. It's just too disruptive and too much material to haul away.
Touched on some great solutions there. We'll dive into those a little bit here shortly. I just want to know, in the article you mentioned, maybe some of the myths about grain. Can you dive into some of the myths about grain and how it happens?
Yeah, so probably the biggest one is the turf. And this is not from superintendents, this is from golfers. They under the impression that the turf seems to follow the setting sun, and maybe we can blame some TV commentators for that. But it absolutely does not follow the sun. It on greens especially, it really follows water. Wherever water flows, grain tends to follow the flow of water, and that is very much true on putting greens, especially, and to some extent on fairways. But on fairways, if you're mowing, if you're repeating a mowing pattern, you can sort of treat train the grass to follow a certain pattern, and the rollers on the mowers are just laying that turf down and training it to grow a certain direction. So it really is important to change the direction of the mowing pattern, mowing up and back on the same pass, essentially mowing into the grain and into the grain is quite effective. Some guys will mow 3 to 9 pattern, which is a bit more labor intensive, but it is another effective way to mitigate the grain pattern. So I think those are the biggest myths, are that grain tends to follow the sun, and really just most of the time it follows water movement. But it's funny, in fairways it can be unpredictable, more unpredictable on fairways. It can be swirly, and if fairways are sodded, especially with zoysia grass, we're seeing a little bit more popularity with zoysia grass in the West, and that zoysia often comes in with a considerable grain, and if sodded with the grain in different directions, that pattern can last for years. And honestly, we're at the bottom of the learning curve trying to figure out how to mitigate that grain in zoysia grass. So we're just starting to do some research on just trying to reduce grain when you sod zoysia grass fairways.
Beautiful. So the main topic of the article kind of was about Bermuda grass. Was there, other than zoysia grass, any other grass that you guys are kind of seeing this with, or it's been a big issue with?
Bent grass, certainly. I don't see a lot of bent grass fairways in the West, but a few up in Park City area, in Utah, in New Mexico a little bit. The mountains of New Mexico see some bent grass fairways. And certainly, and I would even argue that the grain on bent grass can be just as bad or worse than in Bermuda grass. And with Bermuda grass, you can beat the snot out of it in the summer, and it'll respond really well. Whereas bent grass, you have to be a little kinder and gentler, because it may not recover quite as fast, and it's not going to respond to phrase mowing, certainly like Bermuda grass will. So mitigating grain in bent grass has been more challenging, and it probably takes 2 or 3 growing seasons to really make an impact on bent grass that has been trained to have significant grain. I've seen such high grain in bent grass where it's really hard to mow, where the mowers are just riding on top of the bent grass, and even considerably marcelling, where the mower is just sort of chattering across the bent grass because it's just too much grain in there to effectively mow. And so that's certainly been problematic. And brushes, adding front mounted brushes to fairway mowers has been a big help with bent grass. Plenty of light intensity vertical mowing. If you're cutting at 400 on bent grass, set the vertical mowing blades initially at about half the height of the mowing height, so about 200, and then just kind of slowly lower the blades into the canopy. This isn't a you're not trying to go quarter inch below zero initially on bent grass. You just want to do something at light intensity to stand up the turf and follow with mowing. And do that as often as you can. If you can do it twice a month during the growing season, I would highly recommend that. Light and frequent, light and frequent, light and frequent is really the mantra for mitigating grain on bent grass fairways.
How about sand, Brian? Have you guys seen any data or anything that shows any benefits of top dressing fairways or anything to help mitigate some of that grain?
Yeah, so I can't say sand I'm not sure I could directly tie sand top dressing to mitigating grain. Perhaps you could make an argument there. Certainly, it is effective at diluting surface thatch and organic matter. Um, Sand top dressing is an expensive endeavor. Oftentimes it's $80,000 to $100,000 a year or more for an 18-hole property to really for an effective sand top dressing program. Not to mention the equipment that's needed to get that sand out on the property. So I'm really careful with recommending sand top dressing because there's plenty of courses that just don't have the resources to even consider that. But those bent grass golf courses that I've been working with in Utah and Colorado, they all have a pretty robust sand top dressing program. They're top dressing upwards of 60 to 80 tons of sand per acre per year. Each application, they will apply about 20 tons per acre for an application, which is doable. Any more than that, you could probably do that in spring and fall while there's not much play. But in play, anything more than 20 tons per acre is probably too much. Going to get some complaints from golfers on the fairways. So that's a whole nother subject, and maybe we can do that in another podcast because there are plenty of benefits to that, but there are certainly some cons as well with the sand top dressing programs.
How about circle mowing? I've seen a lot of guys implement circle mowing on Bermuda grass, and I've even seen it a couple times on bent grass. Is that something that you would recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. Go crazy, mow in different directions. I like those. I don't not to favor a specific product on this podcast, but the greens groomer brushes are nice toe behind unit just to stand up the turf, and you can drag that in circular or up and down a fairway, and then just follow in the opposite direction with mowers. That's a pretty fast practice that I've seen superintendents do. But to answer your question, absolutely, just change directions with mowing, with brushing, anything you can do to work against the grain, side grain is beneficial to mitigate grain.
Awesome. So just wanted to finish off here talking about the impact of play. Obviously, there's a lot of different things we can do to manage our grain and try and smooth things out. But how do we not impact play or kind of limit the impact on play? Because it's we want to rip up the golf courses as much as we can, but also want to make it a nice place for the players.
Yeah, so a good program that I've seen on let's just focus on Bermuda grass. Generally, you're starting with light intensity practices, brushing, vertical mowing in March or April, depending on the climate. And then, continuing that program through certainly October, perhaps even November, again, depending on the growing season. So those are light intensity practices, but those practices take time, and it really helps it really helps to have a maintenance day. So to have the ability for a closed day every week to shift labor from setting up the golf course to shifting labor to these type of practices is really beneficial. Some courses that's maybe not practical. If a closed day isn't going to work, then maybe just a delayed tea time day, whether it's 10 or 11 a.m. or 12, to allow the agronomy team to get out and do these practices on a routine basis. Do some sand top dressing, spraying, all that. You got to give the agronomy team access to the golf course without disruption to play. So that's one tip. The other one is, again, especially with Bermuda grass, is highly advocate setting an agronomy week, whether it's private, public, semi-private golf course, setting at least 1 week of an agronomic week in the summer when the Bermuda grass is growing aggressively, be able to do some aggressive cultural practices like stand it up aggressively, scalp it, do some aeration, perhaps throw some sand out. So a, a monthly program from during the growing season, and then one aggressive week in the summer is a pretty strong program to help manage grain without a tremendous amount of impact on golf.
So, we been talking about reduction of grain, and you mentioned how, one of the benefits of reducing that grain is also water infiltration. Are there other, you mentioned in the article, potentially some other benefits of some of these practices? What are some of those additional benefits?
Well, so when we see fairy ring, we see some large patch on Bermuda grass. And while I don't have data to support what I'm going to say here, it certainly evidence points to anecdotal evidence points to less thatch results in less disease. So producing a more upright surface that yields better water penetration, better water infiltration through the soil. That all benefits play in terms of a drier surface. We all love to play golf on a drier surface, and a more upright surface that accommodates better water penetration. That all leads to a better playing surface. I would say it very, very likely leads to less disease. Just better oxygen exchange in the root zone. And I'll say I don't have data to support that statement, but I feel pretty confident that those are benefits that are achieved with less grain and a more upright surface.
I'm learning so much right now. This is amazing. Should be getting points for being able to listen to something like this.
Is there anything else you wanted to add to this, Brian, before we let you go?
I feel like we covered it pretty well. Yeah, thanks for the time.
Perfect. No, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great to see you here on Zoom, and look forward to seeing you here in person at some point soon.
Thanks, guys. Be good. Have a good summer.
Okay, you
All
too.
righty.
It was great
You
meeting you,
too.
Brian. Yeah, he was great. I was just sitting here. I'm just like, wow. Okay, so we're brushing our fairways when I get back to the golf course. Oh
Yeah,
man.
I've seen a lot of guys start adding the like the turf trainers onto their fairway units as well.
Right, just
And
right in front of the reel, right?
yeah, in front of stand it up before they mow it. And obviously a lot of built-in groomers and stuff like that on a lot of different units. So yeah, I mean, I think that's becoming a little more common on fairways. But yeah, no, that was an awesome conversation.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the industry, and how you found your way to the USGA.
My name is Zach Nicoludis. I'm the regional director for the Central region for the USGA Green Section, based in Columbus, Ohio. My career in the golf industry started as a high school kid, just mowing greens and raking bunkers at St. Clair Country Club in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then Went on to Penn State's turf program, and then upon graduation, went back to St. Clair for a couple years to do a major renovation. And after that, moved over to French Creek Golf Club as a second assistant in Elverson, Pennsylvania. Worked with Bruce Cadinelli there. Should have mentioned worked for Ron Pusateri at St. Clair Country Club. After French Creek, went and worked for John Urbanski at Bitterman Golf Course. Had a cup of coffee with him. The initial plan was to be there for a few years, but 10 months into the job, the South Course superintendent position opened at Wilmington Country Club, which is right next door to Bitterman. So I spent, I think it was about 4.5 years at Wilmington Country Club working for Dan Pearson, and got to know Darren Bavard, Stanley Zontek, and Elliot Dowling. And having the opportunity to spend a lot of time with those three guys got me interested in pursuing, kind of making a little bit of a career path change and pursuing a position with the USGA. So applied 3 times. So I think eventually they got sick of seeing my resume come across, and got hired to be based in Columbus, Ohio. So initially was hired for Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, and with some changes to the staff over the past couple of years, now travel as far south as Texas and as far north as Manitoba and Saskatchewan, as well as have the opportunity to travel to South Korea several times a year to work with a few courses over there. So get to see cool season, warm season, transition zone, a little bit of everything. So keeps it interesting, that's for sure.
On average, Zach, how many golf courses do you think you see a year?
As far as like official course consulting visits, it's probably somewhere between 80 and 100. Throw in drop by visits, probably getting in the lot. Some of those visits we do multiple visits with courses a year. So that, I would probably say it's easily between 125 and 150 golf courses when you throw in drop by visits, championships, preparing for future championships, stuff like that. So it's nice.
Yeah, I'd say so. You're one of the few people that sees more golf courses than I do probably every year. But how does that experience, being able to see all those different golf courses, all those different climates, how does that help you to be a resource for superintendents around the country?
Get to see, I mean, every golf course is unique, so you get to see a lot of different techniques or strategies or agronomic programs. It's not, as anyone who's worked in the industry knows, it's not a cookie cutter approach to maintaining a golf course. So a lot of times it's just picking up a little, different things that superintendents may have in their program, or, kind of looking through it or looking at different challenges from maybe an angle that hasn't been considered before, and really just trying to take all the knowledge we gain from working with other golf courses to be able to use, when we're troubleshooting at a golf course. It's, sometimes it could be the simplest of adjustment, or it could be more complex where we're talking about really trying to take a deep dive in the agronomic program and make major adjustments. But it's, we're fortunate with our jobs, our positions as agronomists with USGA to, not only visit all these golf courses, but everybody on the team has kind of a unique background. Brian Whitlark, who I know recorded a podcast with you guys recently. You having him on our staff who's really like a soil physics expert, being able to run root zone mixes by him. So I think that's one advantage too. Well, an individual agronomist may be working with a golf course. In reality, the entire green section's behind them. If we need to loop someone else in, Darren Bavard from his championship experience can bring him in if they want to talk about, how we approach setup from that, or how we approach maintenance and setup from that standpoint. So it's kind of nice that we all have very unique backgrounds, and then we can tap those resources too if we run into some challenges we may, having trouble finding a solution for.
So obviously busy job, a lot of travel. What is it for you, would you say, is kind of your favorite part of being an agronomist for the USGA?
I would say that every day is different for sure. No two golf courses are the same. So we have an opportunity or it keeps us, opportunity to keep us on our toes every day. So it's always very interesting, always a new challenge. One of my favorite aspects of our job is working championships. I just worked the Women's Open at Erin Hills with Zach Nicoludis and his staff. So that's great. And head over to the Broadmoor in a few weeks. So championships are always fun. especially with the weather we had at Erin Hills, where Saturday and Sunday couldn't have been any more perfect as far as daytime weather. We were in the 70s, blue skies. So it was great just to really showcase that golf course. That Sunday, it never gets old Sunday, the championship or, championship round. Um, just you get the course set up, everything's done, and you just get to hang out and watch, what these superintendents have worked years to produce.
I think a lot of people have the perception that championship agronomy is just vastly different than normal agronomy. And I think to a certain extent, certainly some of the capabilities when you have a team of 100, it's vastly different. But what are some of the things that you see at these championships that people can apply to their golf courses on a day-to-day basis?
I think, a big part of what we do is data collection. And obviously, we're doing data collection on all 18 greens on the golf course, plus the practice putting greens. So that's an involved process that, we had 3 people dedicated to that at Erin Hills. But I would say it's definitely something that translates into having a better understanding of how putting greens perform and how, kind of taking the perception or, kind of the opinions out of it. If you're measuring, and you don't need to do all 18 greens, you could do one green, or a front 9, back 9, or a couple practice greens, whatever it may be. But I think when it comes to making decisions, whether it's, are we going to mow and roll more? Are we going to increase mowing frequency, lower mowing heights, timing of plant growth or PGR applications, cultural practices, gaining a better understanding of how to get the golf course to peak when it may be, hosting an event, or if it's a private facility with, a member guest or something like that. I think, that, and we're seeing more golf courses or more superintendents do that. And the reality is when you talk about one putting green, it's pretty easy process to put a data collection program in place. I don't think from a day-to-day maintenance standpoint, you need to do all 18 greens. If you want to do a few greens, based on, different microclimates on the course, that can be beneficial, but it's more time. But I think, but I would say that's one thing for sure, to just be able to measure, have a better understanding of how, how to measure and understand how the golf course is performing. So I would say that for sure. But yeah, the thing is, if there's often the perception that a golf course can be maintained at that level for more than a few days, and that's completely inaccurate. The amount of stress that's being placed on the playing surfaces, as well as the resources that are required to do it, are just, it's really for a brief period of time, and then it's, the turf needs to give it a break. I will say on the coverage, we were actually talking about this. What you see on TV is not always what the playing surfaces look like in real life, because we were watching some of the coverage and then we go out there. We're like, oh, okay, everything's fine.
The
I don't know
cues
what
in the TV are just a little off, right?
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I was watching the final round though. I think they said that the stimp was over 13 and a half, which is wild. Like that's
Yeah.
quick for some of those hilly greens.
Yeah, there. I mean, to be able to showcase those putting greens, there's a lot of undulations, and yeah, 13 and a half was what Shannon Rouillard, who's oversees inside the ropes for the Women's Open, that's what she had identified, as kind of the targeted speed, and we were in that, 13 to 13 and a half all championship Friday. There was a forecast for, some pretty significant winds, sustained in the 15 to 20 and gusting up to 30. So obviously got to be a little bit careful with when you have winds like that, but we really were only a few inches shorter on that day. So yeah, 13 and a half. There's a lot of, morning and evening maintenance that goes into uh maintaining that speed and across all putting greens. And then you're all right, we're gonna, do we need another cut on these greens? Do we need to roll? Do we need to roll, or do we forego the roll? So we're always rolling in the evening because to get that smoothing aspect. And then some days we did mow in the evening, some days we didn't. And then especially on Saturday and Sunday, when we were looking at it, it was like, okay, some of the, just making sure all this, checking speeds after the mow, seeing where we're at to make sure um, nothing got too fast, which we were in a good place. Zach and his team knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, it was a great event, great finish.
Absolutely.
So we brought you in here today, Zach. We wanted to talk about your recent article in the USGA Green Section Record, where you talked about practice ranges. Hot
Mhm.
topic. What are you seeing as some of the problems or maybe pain points for driving ranges around the country during your travels?
I would say first, like I'm of the opinion you can't build a big enough driving range tee. I'd sure like to see someone try. But in a good way, we're seeing golfers playing more and practicing more. But in reality, that just results in more. If you're working with a grass practice tee, it's just more divots. And you look at where a driving range, where a practice tee is midway through the season, especially if it's undersized. I mean, it's hard to even find enough space to set up the hitting station. So I would say use is, the greatest challenge in being able to, that rotation through, especially if a course has an artificial hitting surface, which I would, by and large, I think every golf course needs to have an artificial hitting surface if it's too wet or if you have a frost delay, especially if golfers can access the artificial hitting surface without walking on the grass. It gives them, if there's a bit of a frost delay, gives them an opportunity to at least warm up. But I would definitely say, it comes down to the amount of use that drive or practice tees are getting. And, a lot of courses, especially older golf courses, just don't have the space to expand their driving range tees. I mean, we'll go to some golf courses and they may have a 20,000 square foot driving range tee. I mean, they're going to wear that out in a month. You think ideally you'd have somewhere in that like 40 to 50 days uh, to be to go to available for recovery before you go back to a previously used areas. And there are some courses that they might be back there in 3 weeks. So, definitely the a challenge. A lot of golf courses are having, but I think if a golf course doesn't have an artificial tee, investing in it is certainly money well spent. And if there's the opportunity to expand an undersized tee, if that land is available, that would also be money. Or whether it's expanding a current tee, or if there is space available, adding a tee at the other end. I mean, every golf course is different. So but making that investment would certainly be money well spent.
So when it comes to the tee itself, especially if you don't have the square footage, what are some strategies that you can kind of do to optimize your recovery?
So depends on the location uh from everything I've seen. I mean, I would, transition zone, we have access, you could do cool season or warm season grass. I've seen more courses go the route of, if they have, bent grass fairways, maybe they put a Bermuda grass driving range tee. I will say after a winter we just had, there's been, talked to several superintendents where they've had significant winter injury on their Bermuda grass tee. So that's kind of the give and take there. I mean, even with these improved Bermuda grasses that are more cold tolerant, we had a tough winter. And there's a lot of winter injury out there. I will say one strategy have seen gain some popularity, especially in Western Pennsylvania and the Chicago area, where obviously you're not going to use a warm season grasses, converting to one of the new Lomo bluegrasses. So you think about if you've ever played on a Lomo bluegrass fairway, I mean, it's tough to take a divot down, get through the entire mat layer. So while if you were going to compare the germination of, let's say, a bentgrass to a Lomo bluegrass, bentgrass is going to germinate faster. But the benefit is, if you look at how divots are taken on the two surfaces, you take a divot on a bentgrass tee, you're taking all the viable tissue away. You take a divot on a Lomo bluegrass tee, you're really just kind of scalping the turf down. I have some images from a golf course in Chicago where, a couple days after divots were taken, you're already seeing recovery from the viable tissue that's left throughout that divot. So I think that's definitely one option. There's obviously an investment with that in the shutdown time to resurface the tee. Uh, one one technique that I learned when I worked at French Creek Golf Club for Bruce Cagnelli, putting chewing fescue seed in the divot mix. Chewing fescue will germinate a lot quicker. It'll more or less act as a nurse grass, and then the bent grass recovers from the edge of the divot, or if there was bent grass seed included, and eventually just crowds out the chewing fescue. And that technique, whether it's par three tees on a golf course, seeding divots on fairways, I see courses that just use chewing fescue on the golf course. That way, if a golfer happens to fill a divot in the rough, you're not going to encourage bent grass encroachment. You're just going to have some fine fescue in the rough that isn't going to create that dense mat layer, or that, not mat layer, that dense, gnarly turf mowed at 2 inches. That's, like trying to hit out of a box of rope to play from. But I would, definitely that, like we talked about, the artificial hitting surface for sure. Putting that tee or the artificial surface in play more. Say typically, a day, 1 day a week. Usually Mondays is, where golf course will be on the mat, or golfers will be on the mats. Adding additional day or two, you figure if you have about a 7-month season, for every day you add on the mats, that's saving of somewhere around 28 to 30 days on the grass tee. So you start to do the math and working that in. Will say what I've seen from that is if a golf